Yeah, please go ahead. Go ahead.
All right. So, welcome to the latest installment of What's Cooking, Rethinking Farm and Food Policy in the Digital Age. And a huge thank you and welcome to Dahlberg, and in particular to Michael and his team for joining us today and presenting. Let me also start by thanking Parmesh, Vivek, Astrid, as well as our two commentators, Katie and Diego. So thank you everyone for putting this together. And I am Julian Lampietti. I'm the manager for the Global Engagement Unit for the Agriculture and Food Practice at the World Bank. Now, it's very exciting to have this presentation today by Dahlberg. And Dahlberg's going to talk to us about how to create platforms and ecosystems. And Dahlberg itself is a global group that offers many different services, including advisory, design, research, investment, and communications. And what's really cool is they have a mission that sounds remarkably like our own, working to build a more inclusive and sustainable world where people can reach their full potential. So really excited to hear from them today. And they're going to talk about the digital part of the AgriTech revolution. Now, some of you may have heard me say this before, but I think that digital technology is really going to change the face of agriculture. And in particular, I'm really excited about working with everyone on three aspects of this: transactions, traceability, and tracking. So as we think about COVID-19 and the shock it's put on our economy, and we want to build the whole system back better, digital technology can play a central role in this. And agriculture and food is the most complex, biggest market in the world. You have 570 million producers on one side of this thing, and you have 8 billion consumers on the other side. And they produce an incredibly complex product. I mean, just think of the complexity of the decisions that go into something like farming. And as you think about the weather, the soil, the markets, and all these different variables that you have to mix together. And digital technology has a whole bunch of characteristics that lend themselves really well to making or to solving this very complex problem that exists in the agriculture and food space. Let me give you a couple ideas of what those characteristics are. The first is that devices are essentially agnostic. So you can put any piece of information on any device. The second is that there's zero marginal cost of replication and storage and transmission of data. And that completely changes ideas around economies of scale and distance to markets and size of markets. The third is that data is essentially infinitely durable. It can last forever. And another is that data is non-rival, right? So if we put it in the public space, my consumption of data does not affect your consumption. Now, it is excludable to some extent, but there's lots of ways to get around that. So it has these very sort of interesting characteristics that I think are critical to the way we think about this space going forward, and what the role of an organization like the World Bank, what the role of our governments are, and the kind of things that Dahlberg can do. Now, what do I mean by transacting, tracing, and tracking? By transacting, I mean we need thicker, bigger markets so that more sellers can find more buyers. And we won't have the kinds of problems that we're seeing in our food system today, where there's a surplus and a deficit, and the two can't find each other. So how do you build platforms where you can have thicker markets that are more resilient, less volatile, and what are the roles of the public and private sectors in this space? Second is tracing. So we need to follow the food from the farm to the fork for two reasons. One is that the producers can get remunerated properly for all the good things they do in this space, right? So if you have good labor practices, if you have good environmental practices, if you're organic, whatever it is, you can actually get remunerated if you can show throughout the food system that you're doing this. Second, we need to trace the problems, right? COVID-19 emerged in a market, and the better systems we have for knowing where food is coming from and where it's going, the easier it is to pinpoint those problems and solve them. So there's all sorts of cool ideas around platforms associated with distributed ledger systems that are open or closed and so on, that are really an exciting space for digital technology in agriculture. And third, tracking is really about putting more open data out there so we can track all the good and bad things that we're doing. So think about, for example, massive open soils databases so that everyone can access information about soil everywhere at any time. And can we use that to create soil carbon markets? Can we use that to reward farmers for good practices? And so how do we bring data into this space, make it available to bring down the cost of the innovation ecosystem? So let me stop there. I'm really excited about this opportunity to listen to Dahlberg. Unfortunately, I'll have to leave you guys a little bit early to join another panel. But welcome, Michael, and your team, and very much looking forward to hearing from you and to hearing about the discussion. Thank you. Over to you, Michael.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Julian. Just checking if people can hear me well before I dig in.
Yes,
hopefully I'm coming up.
We can hear you.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. So thank you very much for that introduction, Julian. Thank you everyone for joining. We're very excited to talk about the work that we do in the AgTech space and also to really start to open up some reflections that I think Julian has already started on. What does all of this mean during the time of COVID? What will it mean for post-COVID rebuilding and recovery? And perhaps what are some of the implications for what the bank should do or should consider doing in the sector to help really unlock its potential? So the topic of today's presentation is delivering on the potential of digital agriculture platforms for smallholder agriculture in the age of COVID-19 and beyond. And before we jump into the details, let me just introduce myself, and my colleagues will very quickly introduce themselves, as there will be a few other people speaking to elements of our story. So my name is Michael Zahn. I'm a partner with Dahlberg. I've been with Dahlberg for a decade. I am a co-founder and the co-lead of Dahlberg's energy practice globally, but I also co-lead Dahlberg's technology practice, and specifically anything at the intersection. We do a lot of our work at the intersection of agriculture, data, digital business models, and financial inclusion. A few more colleagues will introduce themselves. Naoko, are you on the line?
Thanks, Michael, and hi, everyone. My name is Naoko Koyama. I am a partner of Dahlberg based in Nairobi. I'm also with the firm about a decade in Nairobi. Out of Africa, I've been leading many of general agriculture ecosystem study, as well as the smallholder and gender financial inclusion. And especially around over the past 5 years, I've been leading many of the agricultural technology strategy, and particularly on the ground and getting execution support, and with Ravi, who's going to introduce next.
Wonderful. Thank you, Naoko. Ravi, are you on the line?
Yes, I am. Hi, everyone. Ravi Chathpar, also a partner at Dahlberg and co-founder of Dahlberg Design. Dahlberg Design is our human-centered design practice that we started a little over 6 years ago to bring in human-centered design, behavioral science, design thinking, those types of methodologies into the work that we do across the world. I lead a lot of our agricultural work globally. and in particular, some close partnership with Nauco around a lot of our work with Digifarm, which is one of the case studies we'll be diving into in more depth later today. Thanks.
Thank you, Robbie. Christoph, are you on the line?
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. Very pleased to virtually meet you all. My name is Christophe Bocquet. I'm project manager at Dalberg Data Insights, which is the data science business of the Dalberg Group. I'm based out of our office in Nairobi, and I'm also leading the AgriTech practice of the Dalberg Data Insights business, which means that I'm usually leading our AgriTech projects, but also our business development or business representations as a whole in the AgriTech space. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and over to you, Michael.
And Leslie, just another colleague, Fabiola Salman. Fabiola, are you on the line?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I am Fabiola Salman. I lead Dalberg work in Latin America, and a lot of our work has a focus on food system as well as intersection of agriculture, nutrition, access to finance and technology. And I just wanted to mention that we are planning a Latin America focus convening on AgTech as well as the impact of COVID on the sector for later this summer, probably July, and we'll be involving AgTech entrepreneurs and corporates. And if you're interested, I know there's a number of people on the line that work in the region. If you're interested, we would love to connect with you. And we're also looking to engage other partners at IDB Lab, USAID, etc. Good morning, everyone.
Thank you, Fabiola. Thank you. So just without further ado, jumping into the agenda. So we have about an hour and 20 minutes. But what we wanted to cover was just a quick introduction to what we do in the AgTech space broadly, but really focusing in on digital agriculture and digital agriculture platforms. We'll spend about 5 to 10 minutes on that. Then we'll talk about digital agriculture trends pre-COVID, drawing on a report that we did with CTA on the digitalization of African agriculture. This was something that was launched at the FAO ministerial last year, and then at AGRF, the African Green Growth Revolution Forum in October. But we'll also comment a bit on the global trends building off of that, and then what we are starting to see change or shift due to COVID. Then we're going to pivot to 2 case studies. One of Digifarm, where Ravi and Naoko, if her connection holds up, will be talking through that. So Digifarm, for those of you who are not familiar with Digifarm, is, in this case, we're using as an example of a private sector digital agriculture platform that we have worked on. Digifarm has won the Best Emerging Markets Digital Innovation Award from GSMA this year. Study of the complexities of getting things right in terms of building a financially successful and sustainable private sector digital agriculture platform. Christoph from our data science team will talk through a public digital agriculture platform, public sector digital agriculture platform. This is the Ethiopian Agriculture Transformation Authority Data Hub, which is a good example of the kinds of public sector government agriculture data platforms that we have. And then we'll come back for some final reflections on the path forward, the opportunities and challenges that COVID presents, and perhaps some thought starters on how the World Bank group can engage on these topics, building on all the things that all of the World Bank folks on the line already do. So with that, we will then open the floor up for hopefully about 35 to 40 minutes of questions. If you have questions in the meantime, please feel free to send them through the chat window, answering that. And if we can answer that while going through it, we'll do so. Otherwise, we'll come back to all the questions in the end. So moving on to just introduction. So Julian has kindly started introducing us, but just a few points to highlight. One, we are a triple bottom line social enterprise. So there are a number of entities within Dalberg that bring different capabilities to the table. I sit within the advisors business, which is the consulting business. Robbie is within the design business. Christoph is within the data science. So that's the artificial intelligence, machine learning, big data work that we do. We also have a primary research business, Dalberg Research, that does a lot of work in the AgTech space. We have an innovative finance business, a media business, and then a few other entities that do implementation work and or incubate multi-stakeholder initiatives. But the binding thread across all of these entities is that they all roll up to a non-for-profit Swiss Verein Dalberg Trust that maintains our brand and keeps all of our activities sort of honest to our mission orientation. We're going to be 20 years old soon. We work across the globe, about 500, so mid-sized organization. We have 500 professionals worldwide, 30 offices. Most of our people and the vast majority of our work are somewhere in the global south. We are the largest consulting firm in terms of presence in sub-Saharan Africa, and that's followed by our work in our Asia region and our newer Latin America region, which Fabiola leads. And so that's I think enough corporate propaganda. I'm going to just fast forward to the more interesting content here. So we work across a large number of areas. Obviously, you will not see AgTech or digital agriculture as a circle on this page because it cuts across a number of different service lines in terms of the way we engage in digital agriculture. And it cuts across a number of our practices, including our agriculture work, our digital and data practice, our financial inclusion work, inclusive business models, and so forth. And in terms of just definitions, by AgTech, here on the left side of the page, you can see we're referring to a broad range of technology-enabled business models, interventions, and technology solutions that are not necessarily digital in nature. We work on quite a few of these outside of the green circle that you see in digital agriculture. Particularly, we do a lot of work on the off-grid agriculture energy nexus. So this is off-grid mechanization. Upstream agronomy with a technology component. So plant, soil, pest diagnostics, for instance. But the conversation today will really be anchoring on digital agriculture, which is a subset of this. And within digital agriculture, the way that we frame this internally and the work that we do externally is we think of it as a stack. So there is an underlying foundational digital for agriculture infrastructure layer that has certain kinds of foundational agriculture data assets, such as farmer registries, soil maps, weather, agronomy, pest disease surveillance, and so forth. So these are typically data assets or surveillance systems. It has foundational hardware elements, foundational software elements, and then a set of use cases for digital agriculture that build off of that. And we've structured that along advisory services, market linkages, financial access, supply chain management, and macro agri-intelligence. Each one has many different pieces. There are many different ways to slice and dice these. But essentially, this is the way that we think about the digital agriculture world. Here are some examples, and we'll come back to this as we get into it. But in terms of what do we actually do in this space, so we've done about 600 agriculture projects to date. Increasingly, these projects have a very strong digital agriculture flavor to them. So we've done about 60 AgTech projects in the last 2 years. About half of those were in Africa, followed by Asia and Latin America, and some in Europe. More than half of our agriculture work over the last few years has a clear tech or digital component versus, say, 10% a decade ago, or a decade to 7 years ago. And so I think that probably tracks to many of the things that the World Bank is seeing, and as well as other organizations on the line, where digital just is becoming very much mainstreamed in the way that agriculture, certainly agriculture focused on smallholder value chains in the developing world, is starting to, if not operate, but certainly the space is very much dominated by digital models and digital approaches. And also the way we engage is shifting. So we've gone from doing quote unquote strategy work, market assessments, helping funders, helping corporates, helping investors think about how do they build portfolios of work that are digital in nature, how do they bring digital components into their work on agriculture value chains. We're working much more now on platform design, launching platforms, launching coalitions, and developing and launching products, often in partnership, often multi-year type engagements in partnership with the CGIAR community, DFIs, and a few of the foundations, like the Gates Foundation, which we work with very closely in the space, as well as NGOs like Mercy Corps and a few others. And most of that work still has, probably the majority is still work that is in one way, shape, or form donor funded. But increasingly, the work is just becoming much more commercial, directly with agribusiness, big tech, and commercial investors. And so it's strategy support, and I'm not going to talk about these examples in detail, so as not to bore you, but we'll share the document afterwards. But it's strategy support work for private sector and for more donor sector clients. It's investment and innovative finance work. So this is due diligence for private equity and VC investors, impact investors on AgTech investment opportunities, as well as the actual design and launch of AgTech funds. Product and platform design, and so we're going to be talking about two examples there, DigiFarm and ATA Ag Data Hub today. Data products, data analytics, and insights. And let me come back to that for just 30 seconds. Then policy and advocacy. So everything from national digital agriculture and AgTech roadmaps and strategies, like the one that we did in Armenia, and I think I see Arusiak from World Bank Armenia on the line, to policy toolkits, inclusion research, data privacy work, either working with for public sector or for funders, or working directly with some private sector players. Sector shaping reports, and we'll be drawing on one of those today. And then kind of ecosystem facilitation convening work. So the big Indian AgTech Summit 2 years ago, and the World Bank Africa AgTech Summit last year that we did with the World Bank team and Parmesh and others on the line. So maybe just to wrap up on that, I don't know, Christoph and if you want to just spend 30 seconds each talking about, I know you'll be talking about one specific example each, but the broader portfolio of data science work on AgTech, and the broader portfolio of design work on AgTech, like human account and so forth, just so people have a sense of the scope of our activities.
Please, Ravi, go ahead.
Sure. Just very quickly, just to paint a bit of a broader picture of some of the design work that we do. A big part of it, as Mike mentioned, is around product service innovation or product service design, right? Where we're trying to come up with new types of products or services and the supporting platforms, experiences, agent models, et cetera, that are required to make them successful. There is another kind of core part of our work, which is really around research, kind of segmentation, leveraging some of the, I think the richness of qualitative research approaches that human-centered design tends to involve to try to, create, a richer understanding or a more nuanced understanding of, farmer behaviors, needs, motivations, aspirations. And we often are combining these with other research approaches that are more statistically significant, large-scale surveys, more rigorous kind of nationwide, level segmentation approaches. For example, as Mike mentioned, we've been working for some time to create a data set called the Human Account, which is combines nationwide surveys with in-depth qualitative research across 6 countries to essentially allow for rich profiles of the lives of poor communities across the world. And that's been a helpful starting point for a lot of our segmentation work in other contexts. We also do quite a bit of capacity building work where we're helping organizations kind of develop, bring in approaches or develop, cultures of farmer centricity or human centricity, or bring in innovation methodologies into what they do, and that partially emerges naturally from the collaborations we have with our clients, but also through some dedicated, creation of dedicated trainings, creation of toolkits, et cetera. And so often in practice, of course, many of these, product service innovation, research and segmentation, capacity building, all of these kind of come together across a lot of our work, and often they do involve very close collaboration across the other Dahlberg businesses, right? So we, in general, we find that being able to combine kind of the design approach with, the rigor and analysis that our Dahlberg Advisors colleagues bring in, and the kind of perspectives that our DDI data scientists bring in, is quite unique and can kind of help advance the overall impact objectives of our clients.
Thank you, Robbie. Christoph, you want to just talk very quickly about the data science work that we do in agriculture?
Yeah, and really much resonating with what Ravi just shared. I think that I just wanted to kind of highlight where the data science entity of the Dahlberg Group is especially complementary with the other entities that we have represented today, our advisor and our design entities. I think it's in our capacity to prototype, but also pilot some of the technical and digital solution that we will be talking about today. And this is thanks to a team of data scientists, but also software and web developers that really push, let's say, the boundaries of this prototyping and piloting with our clients. And in terms of, I think, project, what is interesting as an experience, at least from my personal point of view, is that we had the chance to also do this combination of piloting and prototyping with various stakeholders, ranging from smallholder farmers to decision makers. So looking at digital solutions that will support those different kind of stakeholders, really, I believe, bring in value when looking at our previous experience and the expertise that we've been building in the field. And then maybe more a point I wanted to share a bit more forward looking, according to the trend that we are seeing, which from a technical perspective is bringing an extra layer of complexity, but also I believe of interest and high potential impact, is the the systemic side of the digital technologies we are looking at. So we see more and more technologies that are actually connecting, and that's required to connect different stakeholders, ranging from, for example, the data providers to the data consumers, but also to the data operators or the service providers that are actually willing to share data with the broader audience under certain conditions in order to better drive their operations. And I think on that side, I'm really excited today to give you a perspective into the work we've done with the Agriculture Transformation Agency, which is a good example of the portfolio of projects we've had over the last years.
Michael, before you start, just can I make an announcement quickly, because I have to take the chair from Julian when he leaves. I think you need to really watch your time, because we need substantive time on the content, basically, because we have spent a lot of time on the Dalberg part. So you need to balance that out, because we have the two discussants as well. And second, I would like to tell the audience that they can start putting their questions on the chat while the discussion. This is not a kind of webinar where you get to ask questions at the end. You need to start our questions in the chat, and I would encourage all the panelists to start looking at the questions so they are responding to them. Questions are coming in, basically. So the audience, that please start asking questions while the presentations are going on, and we will cluster them at the end and get a chance for the panelists to respond to the questions. And then to Michael and the team is to really take, to manage the time well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Parmesh. So with that, let's jump into the things that we're seeing based on all of this work that we're doing in the sector. So first, just a few pages on the digital agriculture current situation. And so before COVID, what we saw was a fast-growing and promising D4X sector that was starting to become mainstream for specific business models, specific use cases, and in certain geographies, but still had a lot of fragmentation, little coordination. There was very little consolidated baseline to track progress in the sector. There was emerging evidence of impact, both in terms of impact on smallholder farmers and their outcomes, and impact on more macro impacts, as some of these solutions began to rescale, but still fairly early stage and inconsistent evidence base. And there was an urgent need to accelerate sector growth and impact, as well as to accelerate to improve the financial sustainability of the various players, startups in the digital agriculture space. So lots of activity, lots of excitement, lots of growth, but still relatively limited numbers of players that reached meaningful scale or that are truly investable in terms of their economics. And many of those trends were positive. We had a number of ideas of what players like the World Bank, what others can do to kind of accelerate and unlock the opportunity. COVID-19 does mix things up quite a bit. It certainly creates new opportunities. In fact, we've seen a number of digital agriculture players see quite a bit of additional scale in the last few months. Even the number of new players popping up to service the dislocations, or to address the dislocations in food value chains with digital technology. But at the same time, a lot of the players that have been the usual suspects in the digital agriculture space are really struggling. Several have gone out of business or are about to go out of business, as elements of their business model no longer work. Willingness to pay has declined or gone to zero, or just other elements, or they've missed a season, planting season or two, which for these very fragile early stage startups can be quite devastating. So it's a mixed story, but there are definitely new opportunities on the horizon, as well as what we see as tremendous relevance of agriculture, both in terms of addressing some of the immediate challenges to food security that are popping up due to COVID, but also, as Julian had mentioned, in terms of how do we rebuild better and how do we generate jobs and economic opportunities while rebuilding. A lot of this builds on the report that we did with CTA called Unlocking the Potential of Digitalization in Africa. This report is available. I'm not going to go through the findings in detail right now because we don't have the time. But what I will say is that this is something that is going to have, it will continue as a knowledge product through a new digital agriculture knowledge hub initiative that is being launched and funded by a multinational donor coalition, and that will inherit this knowledge product and the database that underlies it, in this case, a database of about 500 digital agriculture players in Africa, that will be expanded into a global database. And so you will see the continuation of that, hopefully later this year with more of a global lens. In terms of the big takeaways, right? So large and fast growing, and you already see quite a bit of penetration. So in Africa alone, 33 million registered farmers using some sort of a digital agriculture technology. And these numbers were grown very quickly, 40–50% growth in both users and the number of enterprises. Still a good way. That still was only about 13% when you duplicate and you do a few other things, only about 13% penetration of farmers in Africa, for instance. But at that pace, the challenge becomes one of how do we reach as many farmers as possible? It's not about reach and not about registration. It's really about use and active use for people to see impact. And active use levels are still quite low. So they are a fraction of registrations, between 15% and 30%, depending on geography and model that one is looking at. You're seeing a lot of business model migration. The early wave was focused very much on advisory, digital advisory solutions. That moved on to a lot of focus on digital market linkages, supply chain management tools, including traceability, as Julian was mentioning, digital agri-finance, and one development that we are very excited about, the emergence of super platforms. So these are players who are taking an end-to-end view. They're bundling a variety of different services, both to enhance impacts on farmers or value chains or businesses they interact with, and to, frankly, just have more revenue sources or more gets you from, let's say, $5 per farm of revenue to over $100 per farmer per year of revenue. And that begins to become much more meaningful. Still early days for commercial viability for a lot of these enterprises. As I mentioned, the impact evidence growing, but still patchy. What we do know is to get to real impacts, you have to stack and bundle these solutions together. That's how you get to 50 to 300% improvement of yields. That's how you get to 20 to 100% improvement of farmer incomes. But still many, many gaps. So gaps around donor coordination, gaps around data, and more broadly around what we're calling midstream infrastructure, including national agriculture data assets that people can build off of. Gaps in other public goods, such as knowledge of what is happening in the space and learning from models that exist, and just the need of further innovation. So lots of detail here that I will obviously not go through, but just pausing on this point of digital for agriculture super platforms, which is a concept that I think a lot of people will be hearing about a lot this year. I know that many people are starting to write about this year. The term was coined by the bank, actually, by CGAP in a slightly different context. But the basic idea is there's no one model here for these super platforms. There are all kinds of owners of these integrated multi-service bundled solutions. Sometimes it's the government. Sometimes it's telcos that are branching out from kind of advisory to a variety of other tools. DigiFarm is an example of that, with Safaricom being in the lead of that consortium. Some are agribusiness led and focused on more commercial or tighter value chains for the agribusiness, but love ways of stacking these services. And some are just niche specialists that are just trying to take this model, but as startups, as AgTech startups. And then, of course, you have global digital e-commerce players who are very much eyeing this opportunity in Africa. They already are doing it in Asia. They're eyeing this opportunity in Latin America. And so this to us is a key area to watch. And Alibaba's rural Taobao, we think, is a really interesting example. The question is, is this where the world is going? Now, this Alibaba coming in and replicating that model elsewhere, that's a possibility, and certainly something they're exploring. But other kinds of players bundling together internal and external capabilities that straddle the full set of use cases. So jumping forward to the case studies, let's make this a bit more concrete and look at a private one and a public example, public agriculture platform example. So let's start with the private one. Ravi, why don't we start with Digifarm?
Great, thanks, Mike. So I'll share a bit about the Digifarm story and also ask Naoko to kind of share parts of the story along with me. So Digifarm is, we've been working on the Digifarm platform with Safaricom and a number of partners through the support of Mercy Corps' AgriFin program for the last 5 years. And when Digifarm at its core is quite simple. If you, from a farmer's perspective, it's a feature phone, Safaricom branded kind of mobile experience where you access using a short code, a USSD menu that has a series of options such as purchasing inputs, getting an input loan, learning about farming practices, etc. So it's quite very simple from a farmer perspective. But as you may imagine, Safaricom, as the largest MNO in Kenya, is not an agricultural player, and to actually deliver on all of those various services, there is a complex network of partners in the back end who are a variety of technology innovators, social enterprises who all have really compelling offerings that we felt could be brought together into a single bundled service platform. So far, within a few months of launching, the platform reached almost 400,000 farmers, and now is reaching over 1.3 million registered farmers in Kenya. And we're continuing to expand the feature set. It's gone through multiple evolutions, starting with an MVP, and we've been building on it and adding to it over the years. And there's a long roadmap ahead to continue developing it further. What's been interesting from our perspective is that we've been essentially had to bring together the full range of Dahlberg capabilities to bring this to life. I'll deep dive a bit into some of the steps that we took and kind of how some of the pieces came together. Next slide, please. What we recognized when we started was that we really need to understand what the needs are of farmers first. Safaricom, I think, had some initial ideas that perhaps the best way to start with rural clients and farmers more generally would be with a small loan, something like a $50 or $100 loan, and we decided let's not start with a product without really ensuring that we understand who we're trying to reach. So we used a human-centered design approach to really understand the landscape of farmers, to develop personas, essentially a segmentation of farmers based on their needs and their behaviors, and at the same time rapidly prototype a wide set of potential services and potential ideas, ranging from advisory services to financial services to other types of services that could support those farmers. Through that process, we were able to converge on an initial MVP and then go through a process, which I'll ask Naoko to describe shortly, to bring along partners who could deliver on key elements of that MVP. But that approach is one that I'd say has been consistently part of how the Digifarm story has scaled. We've wanted to center our ideas around what farmers truly need, prototype and evaluate those ideas to ensure that they take the right form, and then start bringing them to life through detailed design and development. And of course, the more rigorous business case development, go-to-market strategy, partnership strategies, et cetera, that are required to ensure that the concept will, that the services will actually be viable for Safaricom. Next slide, please. Nalco, I'll hand it over to you for these.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks, Ravi. And Mike, can you go to the next one? I'd rather do the partnership side first. Yeah, thank you. So as Ravi has mentioned, once we understood the farmers' needs and we looked around, but first of all, we looked at the Safaricom. Can you really provide everything alone? And obviously no, because Safaricom is the digital company, not the agricultural company, and they are very much open for bringing on the technology partners. That is when we started looking out to first identify and screen the potential partner to go with this journey and provide on the product that we are shaping up. This process of a partner development and facilitation, I mentioned I started with the identification, screening, and we went into the facilitation of a conversation, first of all, one-on-one with the Safaricom and a technology partner. Eventually a group of companies together. And this was really the process of more of the arts than science. There was some science to it around understanding the financials, understanding the value proposition risk. But a lot was around the massaging each other to understand each other. So Ravi's design team also played a significant role here to bring the parties together to workshop around the vision of the DigiFarm and the product and the operational structure. You probably see some of the DAT partner company here, some of them already over here. And then with these partners together, and sometimes just on zooming into one specific partner company or as a group, as a DigiFarm, the previous page, please. Yes, we do want to deliver the value to the farmers, but this is a business, this is not a social program. Hence, this is very much a bread and butter for Dalberg we provided the business analytics services, such as the market sizing or business modeling to inform the business decisions, investment decisions, as well as to put together the case for pitching to a funding partner or additional operating partners. And then the 2 pages down, please. And this way, the DigiFarm launched in 2017. And even after launching, it has been a journey of designing and redesigning, revisiting based on the UX. And also, once we got to the certain milestone, there were other products we wanted to, or the Safaricom wanted to bring on board. So it has been a very much continuous exercise of bringing on board the new partner, reviewing the operational process. And most recently, we have also looked at their network of the digital village agent, DVA, who will be onboarding farmers, supporting and providing some sort of extension services and supporting aggregation, which is actually a very much a critical component of making a digital solution work. So it's kind of intuitive. We are talking about the AgTech, but now AgTech success requires the boots on the ground. And our team from a design, the human-centered design team, looked at the digital village agents, the motivation, emotions, incentives from more like a psychological and a motivational aspect, while also our team looked at the financial incentives. When is it paid? How is it communicated? And really combining different aspects of the holistically understanding of what motivates and what binds the digital village agent to function and serve on the DigiFarm network to provide the recommendation to Safaricom to take on, which is now being implemented. So I hand over back to Ravi on additional aspect of our support.
Yeah, so as Naoko was saying, over time, this has evolved from initially a limited set of services, education, purchasing inputs, to financial services such as input loans, and then a major piece called Digisoko, which is the market access piece, which was quite complex. And as we kind of got better at this process of developing ideas for new parts of the platform, prototyping them, testing them, developing the business case for them, we've continued to kind of think about a long-term roadmap. One of through the continuous evaluation and assessment of the platform, one of the things that we observed was at one point that there were opportunities to improve engagement by women farmers. It was lower than we had hoped. And so we were able to embark on a dedicated kind of gender strategy, which relied on the human account data set, which I had mentioned at the beginning, the public data set. The nature of that data set allows us to essentially look specifically at Kenyan respondents and then recluster that data looking for female farmers. And as a result, we were able to take this notion of female smallholder farmers and break that up into 4 subsegments. Right, and you see these at the bottom: careful strivers, reserved individualists, disciplined pragmatists, etc. As the names would suggest, each of them has a different type of attitude, a different approach to risk, a different level of comfort with engaging with these types of services. And we were able to use that as inspiration for a series of new products. A number of them are kind of savings-based, kind of layaway or micro savings-based products that were specifically designed to improve engagement of women farmers. And finally, I think as a last slide, Naoko, I'll hand it over to you, and then I think we can perhaps take some questions. I see a number of them coming in the chat window.
Yep. Agreed. Yes. So very quickly, last page, but yeah. So just really wrapping up on this case, AgTech platform like a DigiFarm needs one is the conducive policy environment, whether that's the agricultural side, whether that's the ICT or data side, or digital financial policies. And all this doesn't have to be perfect, but that needs to be conducive. And I think that has a huge implication for the audience today. Similarly, this kind of platform requires, we talked a lot about the bundling, and the bundling often involves the different actors. There's a very limited time that one single actor can do everything that can meet the farmer's needs. And this requires the conducive environment for entrepreneurship in general. And the third thing I would say that is required is a kind of financing or a grant or a funding that allows one is experiment, because this isn't about the duplication. Yes, we can duplicate what DigiFarm has done in other countries, but that needs to be adopted to other countries. And I think the case that Christoph is going to talk about in Ethiopia is definitely very different. Another type of a grant or another profile of the funding that we think that are required is really very much the patience. A lot of funding that coming into the technology sector are very impatient because they come with the technology, innovation, a mindset of something can exit in 3 years. However, as you probably all know, AgTech is a part of the AgTech is agriculture. And even experimenting is tied with the harvest season. If you're lucky, you may have a 3 horticulture. And if you're in a very long thread, it's a tree crop, 3 years, even longer. So we need some education to do for the typical investor coming into technology sector for understanding an AgTech sector. So there are many things that are required, but at the same time, I do feel after 5 years, we are getting some good traction. The DigiFarm has been able to mobilize some of the funding to continue and adding a finance to the farmers. I also see potential for bringing a youth into farming by the part of it, digitizing it. That is also getting a lot of attraction from the government and the donors as the next areas of livelihood opportunities. Climate change obviously also pushing the needs for precision agriculture. So yes, I do see a lot of attraction. So I stop here and then let's see the questions.
I would like to interrupt here. I think questions we'll take at the end. Otherwise, we'll never finish this whole presentation. So I would request Ravi and Nako to look at the questions, start responding to them in the chat also right now. And that's our experience on the webinars, that we can't take all the questions together. In the end, we will have a dedicated 20 minutes for you to respond to a cluster of questions. And I will lead that process. Will tell you which questions to take at that stage. So it's Michael, can we move to the Ethiopia example now?
Got it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So jumping forward, so we talked about a private sector example of a platform. Let's talk about a public sector platform. Christoph, over to you.
Yes, I hope you can still hear me well. Please let me know if not the case. And I think that, yeah, as Michael shared with us, this is an example of a public sector stakeholder launching an agriculture data hub, but also one of the major difference with Safaricom is that in this case, the stakeholder is directly focusing and embedded in the agriculture ecosystem in the country, which is obviously very different from the Safaricom case. So in the context of this project with the Agriculture Transformation Agency in Ethiopia, which is directly reporting and working hand in hand with the Ministry of Agriculture, we actually designed, prototyped, and implemented an agriculture data hub. This project has been also directly supported and built in partnership with Mercy Corps. And today I would like to give you a perspective on 5 main points. I will start just with some key learnings. Then I would like to give you a sense of the challenge that the Agriculture Transformation Agency, so ATA, was facing prior to the implementation of the data hub, leading to the work plan that we followed. And then further deep diving into the data hub itself, the infrastructure, the way it operates. So maybe getting a bit more hands-on on the technicalities of the system itself. And then closing this introduction to the project with a kind of a usage scenario to try to make things a bit concrete when it comes to the end user perspective. But very quickly, starting with an introduction. So back in 2019, the different Dalberg businesses with Mercy Corps, the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Innovation and Technology, and ATA itself have highlighted the strong need for ATA to build and launch a data hub. And as you can see, this data hub is, at least in the first instance, really focusing on the centralization and consolidation of the data to strengthen some existing services, but also support the design, the implementation of new services, but also of new programs that eventually serve smallholder farmers, mostly in Ethiopia. In terms of structure, this data hub, as most of them, has 4 different components, ranging from the infrastructure that is both technically and institutionally enabling the working of the data hub. You have the data component, the system itself, where most of the logic is taking place, and then finally leading to the user interface. So in a couple of slides, I will really deep dive a bit more into those different components and the way they actually connect with each other. But in terms of key learnings, and I think that some of them seem quite obvious, but it was still good to validate some of those assumptions with the Agriculture Transformation Agency on the way of this project. And the first one is that we've seen that the agency is really willing to go further when it comes to precision agriculture, but that the data is clearly at the backbone of this precision agriculture. And the data hub is clearly a way to bridge the gap between the data and the precision recommendations and advices that the agency is willing down the line to share with the smallholder farmers. Another really key takeaway is that with an agency such as ATA, the more data, the bigger the case for having an internal data hub, at least internal in a first instance, because the tendency, and this will be a good segue to the next slide, the tendency is actually a kind of segregation, or at least a decentralization of the different system and services that are run by the agency. So in the case of this project, we can see that we've been looking at 3 main digital services that are provided by the agency. But the challenge that ATA was facing prior to the development and implementation of the data hub is that those different digital services were completely decentralized and not communicating with each other. And this means that for both an ATA actor as well as an external actor, it's really hard to leverage the data that is created by those services. And when the actor is taking the time to access the data from the different services generated by those services, it doesn't mean that he or she will be able down the line to connect those different data in order to create the insights that he or she is looking to deliver. And it's even more difficult for an external stakeholder to actually enter in that room and to go through this tedious process. And so today, what I will present you is the way we actually cross a bit the boundaries and connected those different dots. I think it's also important to note that prior to the development of this data hub, the agency in total was already serving about 6 million smallholder farmers in the country, which obviously is highly impacting the design and the way we drive the development of such a solution. Going to the next slide, and I will maybe quickly go through this one because this is just a very high level summary of the process and the work plan that we followed for this creation of the data hub, from framing to the implementation. And you can see that at the onset, so when it comes to the definition of the challenge itself, this was a joint exercise with different Dalberg entities, including Dalberg Advisors and Dalberg Design, who really together joined forces in order to define the challenges and build probably the first assumptions underlying this data hub. This 2-day workshop led to a 10 weeks project where basically we really created end-to-end the data hub I'm going to present. And I think one thing I would like to mention that is really, and that has been key in this project, is that we've been doing and conducting this exercise in close collaboration and co-creation with both ATA and Mercy Corps, which has been instrumental to drive it forward, because I would say you really need to enter the infrastructure of the organization. You really need to access, in some cases, some data that is sensitive. So this comes with a lot of meetings, co-creation and design sessions in order to drive it forward. In terms of key activities and outputs, I think that the cornerstone is the development of the data hub itself, which, as you will see on the next slide, is made of a database, a server-side application, and a scheduler. But yeah, we had also other activities, but today really wanted to give you a perspective into those 3 components at the core of the functioning of this data hub. On one side, you can see that you have the Data Hub users as well as administrators. And on the other side, you can find the three systems, digital services that I was referring to before: the microfinance, the rural advisory, and the market linkage solution that ATA was already driving prior to this project. And the middle piece that is enabling those stakeholders to connect in one single place with those different systems and the data generated by those different systems is the Data Hub. The Data Hub itself is really made of three different core components. The first one is the database. So very simply, let's say, storing in a fairly standard way the data that is generated by the system. But then you also have the server-side application, which is all the logic that is taking place within the Data Hub and really running on all the data value chain end-to-end from the data collection until the data analysis, the different steps of the process. And then finally, very quickly give you a sense of the scheduler, which is in such a context playing the role of an orchestrator. So again, this is very quickly the way the Data Hub that we created is operating. And from the user perspective, you can see that the users can access the data and the insights centralized and harmonized within the hub through dashboard, probably dashboard like the one you've already used in other sector, but also for the more data savvy users through SQL queries. Now, I would like to maybe go to the next slide and look a bit more concretely at a usage scenario, and this will be my last illustration of this project, a usage scenario of the Data Hub. Thank you. And in this case, just willing to quickly illustrate the kind of use cases that the Data Hub is enabling. So you can find, again, two of the systems that we've been mentioning before, the rural advisory on one side and the microfinance system on the other side. And the Data Hub is the place where the data can be, again, centralized and harmonized. And then you would have an administrator of the rural advisory system willing to actually answer a fairly simple question about users that he or she is seeing in the system, and willing to know if that user is requesting information or should receive information about microfinance. Such a very simple question could actually quickly be answered by the Data Hub, which is in this case connecting and looking at the user base on both systems, and then answering to that question by combining the data that is generated in those two systems and data that is initially not made to be connected, in order to provide a very clear and simple answer. And in this case could be that let's say user just joined one of the e-voucher program that ATA is running, and so this answer could, for example, drive the design or the expansion of the rural advisory system. This is again a very, let's say, simple way to illustrate the scenario. This can be also automated, which becomes even more interesting in order, again, for example, to better design the way the rural advisory system, or better serve the smallholder farmers that are already onboarded on the system, to create kind of an intelligence running behind the system and able to better understand the profile of the farmers, to better eventually provide them with the right information at the right time. And then just willing to close this illustration with highlighting some broader use cases that can be enabled and fostered by a Data Hub, ranging from providing insights to policy making and program design, to the precision agriculture, as we were presenting at the beginning of the presentation. But also the Data Hub is a place where other external stakeholders can access to that data and leverage it for their own services or their own program, which at this case
social enterprise or agribusiness or AgTech player is going to use. Then the question of how does one accelerate or catalyze private sector investment for these kind of solutions, whether they are hybrid or public sector or purely private sector. What are the entry points for the bank in terms of accelerating such platforms? Is it about actually funding such platforms and creating demonstration effects? It's about supporting incubation and incubators and accelerators that can build off of these ecosystems and these platforms and build demand for what they produce. So some big questions there, as well as the question of how does the bank engage with the upcoming super platforms? Because there are going to be questions of winner take all. There are going to be questions of monopolization potential, at least for private sector platforms. And lastly, a question around how can the bank use the COVID-19 situation to accelerate the scale up of such platforms, both for near-term response around food security surveillance, for instance, as well as for the long-term rebuilding agenda. So we're going to stop here. We've been answering questions that have been coming in, but we know there are a lot of questions. And so over to you, Parmesh, for the remainder of time that we've got to answer the group's questions.
Thank you very much, Michael, Nako, Ravi, Christoph, and Fabiola. I think this was a fantastic presentation. I wish we had a little bit more time to go through that. And I thank you all for being very patient in answering questions on the chat as well. But we will now turn over to Katie first and then Diego for the discussion part of it, because they are, leading these efforts in the bank in different regions. And I would like to understand their perspective on what they take from that and what questions they would like to raise from this discussion. Over to you, Katie, first.
Thank you, Parmesh. Thank you, Michael and team. That was a great presentation. We have had the pleasure of working together in the energy agriculture nexus in the past, and it's exciting to see the work that you're doing also on the digital agriculture piece. For those who don't know me, I'm a senior agriculture economist working in the LAC region. And so a lot of my comments will be specifically on what we're doing in Latin America, how we're thinking about some of the themes that you've mentioned, and my specific questions to you about where we could start to do more. So quickly, I don't want to take up too much time, but just first related to what Julian mentioned in the opening in terms of thinking about how we can use data to bring down the cost of the innovation system. And this is something that we're thinking about a lot in LAC. How can we use digital agriculture and digital agriculture systems to be able to access higher value differentiated markets in different parts of the world based on data and bring down the cost of these systems for the government? So our framework is built around that. It's built around food system competitiveness for Latin America and international markets. And then thinking about that as the umbrella, there are also other ways, specifically in terms of greenhouse gas emission reduction, et cetera, that we're thinking about how to use data and data platforms across the region to help make LAC more competitive. One of the things that you mentioned, Michael, which I think is really important, and we didn't get into your recommendations for how we think about COVID, but we have seen an opportunity amidst, as you suggested, it's obviously mixed, but we've seen an opportunity to continue to build on platforms that exist and to further those platforms in the current context where people are not able to go out into the field and do some of the work that we were doing before, where person-to-person contact is limited and digital tools become even more important. I'll just mention one example briefly. We are right now in the middle of designing a COVID response project in Guatemala. And through this project in Guatemala, we'll use a number of different platforms and information systems jointly with the government. One of them will be around labor and skill matching. So thinking about how we can train people who work on specific value chains, enter them into a database, and then also enter vetted employers into this database and match the two together. The second piece is thinking about how we do some of the normal technical assistance and business plan monitoring of individual agribusiness investments online digitally. How can we use videos? How can we use WhatsApps to catalog what's going on with each of these projects to be able to have a digital record of each of these sub-project implementation without having to go into the field as we normally do to see the progress. So those are two ways that we're thinking about how we can use the opportunity in some ways of COVID to rethink the way that we're doing some of our work and incorporate some more digital tools. I wanted to also comment quickly on the DigiPrep work that you mentioned related to the dedicated gender strategy. So in Guatemala, in addition to the preparation of a new operation, we also have a trust fund that is focused specifically on thinking about how digital agriculture tools can further women's participation in agriculture. And that is happening through two ways. One, it's happening through targeted training videos where we're creating training videos around areas that are specifically useful and important to women and tailoring the content of those videos to make it understandable and attractive to women. And then the second piece is an online platform together with the World Food Program, where we're working to match the demand from schools to source local products with the supply of farmers in those areas and what products they have. So making that information flow transparent between the two actors so that everyone is aware of what's going on and there's a better matching between supply and demand of local foods in those areas. And that's all targeted at women. So your work in Kenya, thinking about how you further incorporate women is a really, I think, interesting and important one, and one that we'd like to learn a little bit more from. One of the reasons I say that is because your human-focused work is much more beneficiary targeted. And one thing I really heard from your entire presentation and the way that you work through things is how much you've started with this human-centered design and then moved up. And I think just given the way that the World Bank works and given who our direct clients are, oftentimes we start with what the government needs and then work down. And so some things I've through a number of different digital projects I have. One, for example, in Uruguay, we have a lot of great systems in place to use the existing databases, but they're not really great for the end users. So they're not really supporting producers all that much. They're more assistance tools for the government to be able to make decisions, to do monitoring, and then also to enforce things. So I also think we have a lot to learn from the way that you use human-centered design to really think about how these solutions can be tailored to farmers and producers and end users, as opposed to just our government counterparts, where I think we have a tendency to put more weight.
I think it's a really, really critical point, Katie, just responding to that quickly, because we've seen 3 or 4 questions specifically on that framed here as why are we not seeing more uptake? Why are we not seeing more success for some of these models? And the question is it because people can't afford it? Is it because connectivity is insufficient, and so forth? Our hypothesis in many cases is that the value proposition is the core issue, and that is why we've been basically doubling down, because otherwise you build amazing tools and people just don't use them.
Yeah.
So we've been doubling down on the human-centered design piece as a result.
So, Michael, I would like to bring Diego in because people have some deadlines there. Katie,
I have just maybe if I can use 2 more minutes. I just have a couple more things. One, so a couple more things that you mentioned that I think are really, really important for our work globally, but also in LAC specifically, is that the piloting of these systems takes longer because it's on agricultural cycles, right? So we're not just talking about piloting a system, we actually have to go through several agricultural cycles. And then 2 other pieces, one is on youth. So the farmer population in LAC, as in many other places in the world, is continuing to age, right? So we have a lot of old farmers in LAC. And one of the things that the governments in LAC are doing is thinking about how to bring in new and youthful voices to spur innovation in these sectors. And one of the things that they're relying on are these digital tools. same with climate smart ag and precision ag, which you mentioned, but sort of hand in hand, that there are opportunities. And there was actually a exchange that Parmesh led last year to South Korea, looking at how South Korea is using digital agriculture, precision tools, and other tools like that to basically be able to draw in youth and continue to improve their precision agriculture. That's one of the things that throughout Latin America are looking at learning from. And then the last thing that I'll say very quickly is you asked a lot of great questions of us at the end. And I think some of those questions, as I listened to the presentation, were questions that I actually had for you as well. So one of them is thinking about the way that the World Bank operates. How do you see our potential to incorporate more aspects of human-centered design in the design of these platforms, given the government demands and what they want these platforms to do? The second one I wanted to flip back on you before I even saw your conclusions was, how can we support governments to think about these super platforms, that if this is the future of where we're going, what role do governments have in helping to foster maybe private sector participation or create an enabling environment for that to happen? And then the last one is, you've talked a little bit about how you've turned over these systems. I think in both cases, in the final case, you turned it over to ATA, and in the previous case, the idea was to turn over at least the report to this coalition of multilateral donors. What do you think in terms of sustainability of all of these things, and whether or not, when ATA is managing this platform, if it will really be sustainable just in terms of operation costs? I say that in the context of once working on a project in Haiti where they didn't have internet for 3 months because they didn't pay for the internet bill. So just thinking about those types of things and sustainability. Thank you very much. It was a great presentation.
Thanks a lot, Katie. I have decided to extend the whole thing by 15 minutes because it's too rich and everyone wants to participate, and I feel that the audience is feeling left out. So I will now hand over to Diego, basically, because I think Diego is our lead agriculture economist in Africa, leads a lot of operations, and also leads our work on ag innovation systems in Africa. And I think we should specifically look at the Africa situation and respond to what you have done, since both the cases are there. Over to you, Diego.
Thank you, Parmesh, Michael, and Dalberg team. Congratulations and thanks for presenting today. I saw great questions in the chat, so I'm very eager to listen to the answers. So I'll keep my points short, provocative. So I'll put out 3 points for the Dalberg team to get their reactions and their thoughts on. And this last slide that we're watching pretty much touches some of them. So it would be great to hear from you about that. The first one is how we can make the link on what the World Bank and other donors and governments are doing today in terms of investing in agriculture innovation and the digital agenda. Right now, they seem very disconnected. So we have our projects investing in agriculture research and development centers, CGIAR, National Agriculture Research Institutes. Our projects invest a lot in agriculture extension, some in Southern Africa, agriculture education. And the digital aspects are marginal, let's showcase this drone, but there's no integration of the digital in agriculture innovation policies, agriculture development policies. As we are integrating climate, gender, digital, we don't see it there. So what is it, and you mentioned an example of extension, which was a good one. What is it that we need to do to really bring the agenda in the agriculture innovation agenda, which has in Africa tended to be very public sector donor driven? And so here is more about private sector solutions, so how we can integrate that. And even middle income countries are having trouble. I'm not saying that it's only Africa, but how we do the interface. That's the first one. The second one is that you and also us at the World Bank, we are presenting this digital tech as an opportunity. You have it in your title, you have it, as an opportunity. I see it more as a very urgent thing where we are falling behind. And I'm wondering to what extent you have evidence that the digital economy, the digital technology system is advancing much more in urban areas, much more in middle, upper income countries, and that really the low income countries and Africa are falling behind. For how long we've been listening to the same tech companies. Is it really that we're falling behind, or is the digital ag agenda of regions like Africa catching up? So, and what do we need to leapfrog? So, for example, when the agriculture innovation agenda really took a turning point, countries invested in very bold ideas. They sent out hundreds and hundreds of students to get PhDs in agriculture, and then they brought them back, and inserted them into agriculture research institutes, for example. And that gave a big boost. So what are those bold ideas that you think will enable countries of regions like Africa really catch up to the digital revolution, the digital technologies? And then the third one is, at the base, what it's important is the adoption rates. So farmers and different technologies, the success when you do the economic analysis of any investment is the adoption rate. How many people will adopt it and how fast they will adopt it. So what is for you the key to get these adoption rates up for smallholder farmers? I'm thinking, some of these studies that just came out that saying that farmers still learn from their peers. They will not learn from an app, they will learn from a peer. They will use the app to learn from the peer, to see what the peer is doing through chats, social media, but they will still mainly learn from peers. So how do we, get that rate of, so basically turn the digital text to be able to boost that rate of adoption of new technologies and new practices. And here again, what the potential is for low skill bias technologies. You don't need to bring the education level of farmers up in order for them to use the technologies. You can bring down the technology to the skill level of the farmer. And so to what extent that is being pushed hard to get the adoption rate. So those are the three issues that I would like to put forward, more on the policy side, on whether we should be changing the language from an opportunity to one of really emergency to catch up because we're falling behind. And then the third one is on adoption rates and what you think are some policies would boost.
Thank you very much, Diego. And so what I'll try to do is I'll try to summarize some cluster of questions so that we can spend the remaining 15 minutes focused on those. And Michael, you can then divide it among your team. And I really appreciate what your team members have already answered some of the questions. And what we do normally is we record the thing, the whole conversation, and we send out to everyone so it's available to people. But also curate the chat. And then we will send you the chat back again to you so that we give the curated Q&A kind of thing to the people, because the webinars need to do things differently these days. But the questions which clearly are clustered, and I think I will incorporate the audience questions and the KTN questions. One is that, is this a niche kind of way of doing things? We can do this in certain countries, both the data hubs as well as the kind of things we do with Safaricom. So Orange Telecom wants to do something similar, but it's not able to do it. How do we push, say, a telecom company like Safaricom to do it in other areas? Because we have telecom companies approaching us at different points of time. So how do we push a Safaricom kind of a model? And will it work only in places like Kenya? Are there any enablers which will make it work? It's not a universal solution. And that's the DGO's issue about what do you do which is more universal, which is like combines low tech and all and creates another kind of an ecosystem which doesn't have huge amounts of things to be there. And what do we do in kind of creating proof of concept to countries where they should invest in this, in an ecosystem platform in a more systematic way. So I want some kind of talks about it. If we are now providing advice to countries, where do we go and do this kind of work more intensively? What are the conditions in which this will work better? The second is that, what is the kind of inclusion part of it, which I think even Diego is referring to. A lot of people are asking us about. It's not the gender, it's the smallholders and all that. It's this ecosystem. But I think I like what you have done, what Ravi presented on segmenting and then getting more market data on what's happening there. So how do we develop more inclusive innovation architecture or inclusive products and services architecture there? There's a second question, the cluster there. And third is that what are the metrics by which we will assess whether the platform is working or not, basically, because this needs investment. It's not going to be without investment, both of time and expertise and all that. And if we were now going and doing it in a new country, if you were going and suppose we ask you to go and do it in a new country, based on what you have learned till now, you think it will take less or it will take exactly the same time as it took you in Kenya and Ethiopia? So that's another thing which is very, very important, because I think the window for doing this is limited some of the time. And the finally thing is that what is the incentive we can provide for governments and private sector to adopt this approach? So what is the lever by which we should push them to adopt that? So these are some of the clustered questions. I haven't taken all the questions in, but if you can just spend the remaining 15 minutes to answer some of these questions, it will be great. And over to you, Michael. Michael, can you hear me?
Hi, thank you, Parmesh. I guess the mic might have lost the connection, so just until he comes back, I can start the addressing some of the questions. Thank you for summarizing that. The team, please just feel free to chime in as well. So your question, the first question was, is it a niche thing? Is it only working in Kenya or Ethiopia in unique condition matters? Yes or no? I think it can work as other places, but the environment does matter, and it might affect the scale and the speed it can expand. Like in the case of a Safaricom, in case of a Kenya, one dominant mobile technology company with the commitment to serve the smallholder farmers, and there was a drive as well, and it reached out to a rural area. So that was the really enabling environment in a sense of the actor. Similarly, about the technology startup environment, that could have worked as well. If we look at the other countries, maybe one or two things might not work. However, we've also we are seeing some of the models that the agro processors or off-takers are taking a lead in digitizing their engagement with the smallholders by digitizing the procurement system and adding some of the products. So we may not see exactly the same model exiting in an environment that is very different. But I think there will be another model that can excel in other the environment. Mike, I think you are back.
I am. Thank you, Noko, for jumping in. Hopefully people can hear me now. But I think it's coming back to this question, Parmesh, of other kind of interesting shortcuts here that the bank can take let's say using the MNO model as one model as an example. It's a difficult question because if you look at DigiFarm, for instance, it's still very much a consortium approach, and that consortium will look quite different in many cases when you go to different countries, because the pain points are different, and the you need to have at some point, if you integrate, let's say, market linkage and finance into the equation, you need to have partners on the ground who have that proximity to farmer, but also the agricultural capability. Who that partner is often is not a scalable issue. It's very local. And so right now you've got, we were tracking 6 million farmers that are on some sort of an MNO-based solution, 6 to 7 million farmers in Africa, for instance, across 15 MNO deployments across 6 MNOs. We do think some of that is scalable, but you're going to see clusters in regions or subregions. It's going to be very hard for someone like Orange to just pull this work in 10 countries in parallel, because this coalition building and the development of tailored value propositions, it is value chain specific, it is context specific, and it requires a lot of work. So sadly, it seems that it's hard to get to kind of silver bullets on this. But to your question number 3, in terms of time to implementation, I think we can get a lot faster as we learn, but it still requires a hell of a lot of patience to build these platforms up. Whether we're talking about certainly the public sector ones, which are just essentially public goods, or the private sector ones, because there's still quite a bit of trial and error that needs to happen, and still quite a bit of learning from
You guys hear Michael? I lost him, it seems. Yeah, now I can hear you.
Apologies, I'm not sure how much you could hear me because it seems my connection is now lagging. I will go over video, but hopefully my colleagues can jump in to keep responding.
It'll be good if you get out the video and are able to answer that. If not, Christoph to come in, because there were many questions related to the public sector solution. Christoph, can you and talk about what are the conditions under which it will work? Is this will work in Ethiopia, or it can work anywhere else? And what are the for the data hub solution to work?
Yes, maybe very, very quickly. I see that we have little time, but I can try to give a perspective a bit very high level, and then another one closer to the implementation itself. I think that from a higher level perspective, it's really important, obviously, to have really strong custodians of this kind of project at different level in a country. And in the context of Ethiopia, it's quite interesting and very promising, because it comes from the Prime Minister level and the Prime Minister office, which is really much pushing the digitization agenda in the country. And it goes until the Ministry of Agriculture, that is then onboarding such an organization like the Agriculture Transformation Agency, which has, at least among others, the mandate to push this digitization and tech agenda in the agriculture ecosystem in the country. So I think that on that side, Ethiopia is clearly a very strong case to drive this kind of project, which doesn't mean that if you don't have that, it doesn't work. But unfortunately, this is a bit of the chicken and the eggs. It's a question that is hard to answer. But what I can tell is that I do believe that this is playing an instrumental role in the case of Ethiopia, really having strong custodian of such an agenda, the digitization in the overall country, but also in the agriculture, but then also the capacity on the ground, because obviously handing over such a system like a data hub comes with a lot of challenges when it comes to skills, capacity, expertise. But what we were, let's say, really lucky to have in this partnership with ATA is that we realized going on the way that they already had internally the majority of the skills and experience needed to run and operate such a data hub. Probably to scale it up, there will be a need for some upskilling, but at least the required piece to make it sustainable is already there. So I think that this has been really playing another critical role. And then I will just finish this answer with a third piece that I think we've seen as being really key in the case of the data hubbing with the Agricultural Transformation Agency, is that they didn't try to push the data science agenda before pushing the digitization agenda, which is sometimes the case, but they actually need to go sequentially. It's really hard to be more data driven when there is no data. It sounds very basic as a takeaway, but I think that in the case of ATA, we had a lot of, again, the success was linked to the fact they had those three systems I was referring to initially, already delivering digital solutions to about 6 million smallholder farmers in the country, and thus and hence generating a lot of digital data that is able to fuel a solution like a data hub. So I think those three components have played a really key role in the context of Ethiopia. And I know it's only partly answering to your question. It doesn't mean that when you don't have that, it doesn't work, but at least that's what I can tell you from the Agricultural Transformation Agency perspective and the Ethiopia context.
Thank you, Christopher. I think we will do a separate kind of webinar on ATA and this thing, which could be a joint Dalberg and ATA webinar eventually. So we'll come back to you on that, because this is an important case, because it's one of the few cases where it's happening within the government. And so I think there might be a more buy-in on that solution in countries like Rwanda and others who want to go in this direction, but want to know how this can be done. So organizing some kind of learning around this examples is also something I want to talk to Michael and you guys later on. But this could be the kind of cases. Yeah.
Oh, apologies. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Michael. But in the sense that I think if we can organize learning around these platforms.
Mental question, because there's one ATA, there's one Rwanda. There are a few examples of countries which have these kinds of institutions, and often these institutions don't exist. And so what basically happens is both the innovators as well as funding a lot of this innovation for these public goods, they have no one to hand it off to, and they are not well positioned to either create new institutions or to capacitate institutions or departments within government to own this kind of agenda or own the actual data assets and tools, which I think does raise very fundamental questions here around the sustainability and scalability of these models, unless there's some really fundamental step change in public sector funding for these kind of foundational infrastructure that the private sector will not build in a similar way or will not build alone. So I think it is a really fundamental question. So good one, I think, in the future.
with you on that. I think since we are running out of time right now, I would just like to thank everyone. And just also to announce that these particular series of webinars are now under the campus of the World Bank, and they are on that platform, and they are going to thousands of people all over the world who are able to see these recorded videos and all, and they are part of the learning which a lot of people from the government and private sector and lots of others are doing that. So I think this the outreach is very important. I want to welcome all the people in Open Learning Campus who have participated in this. The second thing I would like to really Michael and Nako, Ravi, Christoph, and Fabiola for really spending a lot of time and distilling a significant learning which has happened across so many years, rich experience with us in a short period of time. There's a lot of learning for us and from that, and we at the World Bank are interested in learning and then changing the way we work based on these examples which you have quoted. And I would also like to thank the discussants, Katie and Diego, and all the participants. I wish we had more time to get all their questions in and then bring it in, but I think we will do a next series on some of these cases later on so that people get a chance to deep dive on that. With that, I would like to close today's session and really thank you all. And the next session on Thursday is going to be on soils, and we are going to work with the firm S2G Ventures, which works on food short and developed a soils challenge globally, and they are funding people who are really coming solutions, bringing technology, data, and all this to the soil side. Please look forward to the announcement which will come out later today, and we welcome you all, and we look forward to this conversation. Thank you again, Michael, and the Dalberg team. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, everyone. Sorry for the tech fail at the end, but thank you so much for your questions and for engaging.
Thank you, and we will get back to you with the curated question. And if you can just give